gay men are a subgroup vulnerable to depression and suicide.
Hello and welcome to the show. Colourful conversations with clergyman Pete and businessman Mark. This week we debate Bert, Ernie and sexual denial. The organisation behind Sesame Street has denied cohabiting duo Bert and Ernie are gay, following comments by one of the show's writer. Well, that was Mark Saltzman. Now, he said in his writing about the roommating couple was based on his personal relationship with the film editor Arnold Glassman. Sesame Workshop then issued a statement saying that the pair do not have a sexual orientation. Well, yeah, why? Quite simply, Bert and Ernie, although they may look human, they are actually remaining as puppets, remarkably. So is it that actually we're reading too much into sexual orientation, especially with things such as children's programs? But the subject is much wider than that. And in fact, it even goes as far as actually homosexuality seems to be a subject that is in the media quite regularly. When you think about people who are actually even denying that they're even homosexuals, and yet there are some that do actually declare that they are gay, but actually are not admitting that the fact that this is wrong. Now, the church has a particular view on that, and I will be talking to clergyman Pete about this and a lot more. But before we do, here's a little poem to get some thoughts. And when you think about the game of homosexuality, some things don't always add up. It's called court and bold. If you're on a sticky wicket with nowhere to hide, and people think you're batting for the other side, despite allegations and things you've denied, when you blatantly bowled too many googlies wide, then no matter how hard you really tried, stories had people stumped as you took them for a ride. So declare you've been caught out as gay with pride, because it's just not cricket if you simply lie. Well, clergyman me, Pete. Let me ask you this question. First of all, do you think Bert and Ernie are gay or not?
Well, I think that the point that they are in fact puppets is a useful one. I think that the assumption that two men in a close relationship cannot be heterosexual is problematic in itself, but to foist that sexuality onto puppets is very strange. I mean, there's a conflating of the idea, at any rate, with a certain campness or flamboyance with being homosexual. It was put to me like this: we both British and know the sort of the English culture, and part of English culture and English society are posh people who go to private schools, and people who are not familiar with British society and the way people behave just assume that pretty much all of people who are posh and attended a private school, which we confusingly in Britain call a public school, but that's for another show. Explaining that it'd take a whole show. But the people who have done that, so they go to an all-male school, so they develop a certain way of behaving. They go to school where there's a certain way of speaking, and they develop a style of speech that appears to people outside of British culture as being homosexual. I was watching a YouTube car show in which in the comments underneath it's just assumed that this guy was homosexual. He isn't, and the reason he's homosexual is because he's slightly flamboyant in his manner. So there's an assumption that there has to be a sexual reason behind everything, and that's really what I'm highlighting here. Whether it's the two puppets cohabiting, or whether it's actually the relationship between the two robots and the original Star Wars with C-3PO and R2-D2. Yes. Oh yes, they're behaving like an old gay couple. Well, are they? Really? That's been put on it after the event. Now we can look into other dramas long-lasting duos in entertainment. In Britain, there's a famous comedy duo called Eric and Ernie, and Ernie, the same as the character his name is the character in Sesame Street, but actually Ernie Wise and Eric Morton, his partner on the show, both of whom were heterosexual, happily married men. On their show, they slept together. They would have various comedy sketches in which they shared a flat and they would sleep in the same bed. There was always the assumption that there was nothing sexual in it. And of course, as we were talking about this off air, you pointed out, Mark, that Laurel and Hardy had the same sort of regular recurring theme of them sleeping in the same bed and the humorous antics that they got up to, none of which were sexual. So, yes, I do think that we're reading too much into it, that sex is being pushed onto events, people, characters, even if they're puppets or robots, that just don't deserve to be there. Why does everything have to be about sex? I suppose that's really underlying the premise of this episode, isn't it?
Yeah.
Making everything about sex.
Yeah, and then the other thing here is that the Sesame Street series has been running now since its pilot episode in 1969. So it's a well-established program for children. And it does offer, as we all know, some educational things. That's the whole point. It talks about numeracy and it talks about literature and about relationships. But is it really well placed that the media and many others are starting to, as you say, overlay other things about the characters themselves? Now, in the case of Bert and Ernie, just for your awareness, the writers have clearly said they will not marry.
Yes.
Well, yes, great. But actually, we've also got to think about the audience. I always say in business, know your audience. Now, the audience here are obviously children, but they're also parents of children. And when people start to sort of weave in this sort of sexuality story, I just think it's slightly irresponsible because, let's be honest, they are puppets, they're friends, they're just there to entertain. And when you think about this concept of denial, hence the point of the poem, which is, it's just not cricket, is it? That if you're in a form of denial, surely, using something like an icon of a children's program isn't the right platform to have this sort of debate. Now, I'm all for educating youngsters about the ways of life, but I just think that your comment about reviewing things of the past or even the present and reading too much into it goes too far.
Yes,
and it's the going too far bit. Now, maybe whether our listeners, some of them may be homosexual, some of them may be gay, lesbian, and others will be heterosexual. The point being is that you will have reasons for being the way you are, and you will stand up for your rights. But I think I'm going to take a bold statement here, and that is that I think our listeners would probably agree that there are some situations where it's taken too far, and media in particular seem to be reading a lot into things such as the Bert and Ernie character.
Yes, I agree. Yeah,
and playing on the stereotypes that often really don't have any place in society and they don't reflect reality.
Yes.
So why is it that people are doing that? What's their motives?
Yeah, well, I think there is a level of denial that you were talking about. The denial is that there is a certain order to life, a certain way of behaving that they want to try and escape from. There's an attempt to escape from what is seen as being the straitjacket of sexuality, in that. The Christian belief, and actually all the major monotheistic religions' beliefs, all three, the Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, all teach that sex is just for marriage between a man and a woman, and that should be for life. And it's been part of traditional belief in the way that societies are built up. Over the years, all the successful societies have made that part of their structure. And there's a denial of that, I think. People just don't want it to be true, or because they'd like to have the freedom. to express themselves as they want sexually. And the thing is, if you're a heterosexual person, you want. Well, let me put it like this. I was experimenting with an illustration for how to illustrate this. If you have a certain boundary for the way that you can behave, people are always going to stray over it. So you've got to have it really, really strict. For example, if you have an area of a town where you don't want people driving over 45 miles an hour because it's been shown that that's unsafe, you'll be foolish if you set the speed limit as 45 miles an hour. You would probably be just as foolish if you set it for 40 because people are still going to speed. If you set it as 30, it's such a long way from it that you're ensuring that people are not going to actually go over the real limit. And although you could say, well, it doesn't make the whole of society fall apart if a few people do strange things with their genitalia, or they choose to mimic heterosexual behaviour in a homosexual way. No, that's true. The whole of society doesn't fall apart with that. But if it becomes prevalent, it's a sign that society is falling apart. It eats away at the structure of society, along with other sexual misbehaviour, which is more important than homosexuality. I mean, if a homosexual couple is faithful and, like a marriage between a heterosexual couple, well, how is that harming society? Well, it still is, because it's deviating from the way that sexuality is expressed, the gel society together, the looking after, producing and looking after children. But just that's not going to cause the whole fabric to fall apart. You might say yes, but it's a question of setting the standards very strictly so that you can maintain this as a way of life. In the same way as you set the speed limit to 30, the expression of sexual behaviour has to be between a man and a woman in marriage. A marriage has to be set as being for life. And if you don't do that, what do you see? Well, you see attempts at stemming the tide of this in the Me Too movement, which is, as you know, heterosexual and homosexual. You see the whole fabric of society falling apart, with broken marriages, with children being brought up in a haphazard manner, and you see, as a symptom of it, people saying that puppets are homosexual. You get a whole distortion of the attitude to sexuality. When what you are, you're in denial of what the reality is, which is that sex is between a man and a woman and for life. If you just admitted that, then you would at least be able to deal with the problems that are caused. We'd at least have a chance.
Yes. Well, I would agree, and there is something else as well. This hijacking of an icon, such as the Bert and Ernie, actually, in my opinion, is slightly wrong. Because again, I come from the standpoint that these really are just children's entertainment icons.
Yes.
But the gay community over the years have actually used the two characters quite extensively on imagery for their own gain. So whether it be for the puppet parts inspired by Broadway musical Avenue Q, or even the New Yorker ran a cover image of the pair watching television in each other's arms, and this was back in 2013, entitled "Moment of Joy." But this isn't new, because I'm going to cast your mind back to something which probably we can relate to, which is actually Action Man. Oh, yes. And the reason is that when I was a child, I was given an Action Man. This is a little plastic doll. It's mainly for boys. And
G.I. Joe, isn't it? In the US, it's G.I. Joe, the same.
G.I. Joe, but the point being is he's a soldier. Yeah. And he comes in different guises. But the one question at the time, and I do remember it, was that anatomically he wasn't accurate.
No, he had something missing.
Some small thing missing.
Yes,
and
speak for yourself. Yes.
People kept saying, was this now an icon for something else? and I have to say, luckily, I saw through it in the sense that I thought this was ridiculous. I mean, it's just a toy. But actually, even at the time, this was in the 60s and the 70s, I thought, well, surely culturally things were changing, where there was more acceptance of people's sexuality. But even as a child, I thought, how dare you try and hijack something like an icon
Yes.
of a toy?
Yeah.
And so this thing has happened before, and yet we're not learning.
Yeah.
And talking about your speed limit, so what I think is important is that I think it's a responsibility of not just the individuals, but it's a responsibility of the media and government and people wherever you are in society. Think about the impact of what you're saying.
Yeah.
And that's really where I think that we're just not learning. Because I say the Bert and Ernie situation is not new.
Yes, and now right at the start of the show, I gave it a quote from a scientific paper taken from the American Journal of Men's Health back in 2017, July 2017, and that was where I said gay men are a subgroup vulnerable to depression and suicide. In fact, gay men are 3 times more likely to be depressed, and depression, it makes you at high risk of suicide. And so, in almost wishing people to be homosexual, in publicising it, encouraging, what you're doing is encouraging people to be depressed and commit suicide. I mean, and people are in denial that they're doing that. Why is this the case? Well, there's lots and lots of reasons, but as I say, one of the main ones we could say is a justification of your own behaviour. You know, if you make it okay to be gay, okay to and you can extend the sexual deviance further and further, then your own misbehaviour is absolved, and it makes the whole of life easier, it seems, in the moment. But it doesn't, does it? You know, people are still get depressed. Homosexuality is now encouraged. If you come out as being homosexual, it's not that people look down at you. You think, oh, great, he's one of the stars, of society these days. And yet, even though people can come out, they don't have to hide it at all. They are still subject to depression and suicide. There's no evidence of it going down. There is some evidence, looking through the research, that it's increasing. And I think the reason it's increasing is because homosexuality itself is related to depression and suicide. The Bible uses homosexuality as an example of a sin. Although it does single it out, it's not that it's a worse sin than any others. It singles it out as an example of when society has gone wrong. This is Romans 1, verse 26. Because of this, God gave them over to shameful lusts, and even their women exchanged natural sexual relations for unnatural ones. So it's homosexual sex, it's gay and lesbian, is an example of what's happened, of what is seen when society has fallen apart. But what exactly has happened? It said because of this. Well, this that it's been because of is that they exchanged, this is verse 23, the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like a mortal human being and birds and animals and reptiles. In other words, idolatry took the place of worship of God. And we put lots of things in place of God, and a lot of them actual images. We idolize, if you like, people, actors, celebrities, and financial gain is seen as something that's good and in and of itself, rather than being the root to all evil, as the Bible says. No, yes. The love of money being the root of all evil. Now, this being the case, you can see that it's the opposite to what's often imagined to be the Bible's teaching. It's not that, oh look, you're a homosexual, therefore God's wrath is on you. It's rather the other way. God's wrath is on you because you've abandoned his ways. You turned away from him. You put things in his rightful place as the object of worship and the one who will teach you how to live. You put something else in its place. Therefore, you're given over. God hands you over to follow your lusts wherever they take you. And for some, that will be homosexuality. So you're handed over to it. Let me put it like this. It's like this. I want to do things my way, says humans. God says, oh, all right then. That's really what's happening. And we need to just admit that to ourselves. Stop living in denial. Homosexuality is wrong. It's a wrongful desire, and acting on it is sinful. Let's just admit it to ourselves that that's so obviously true. It's obviously scientifically not natural. It's obvious scientifically from all the research that it causes suicide and depression, or at least closely associated with it. So let's admit that to ourselves and actually try and minimise the expression of homosexuality in our society and stop pretending that puppets are gay.
Yes.
Let's okay.
Well, indeed. Well, look, there's a lot to
stop it.
debate and cogitate. But there's no denying that there are people in denial. Well, listeners, do you agree with Clergyman Pete? I mean, do you have the same view? Maybe you've got a different thought there. Maybe you've got some thoughts about Bert and Ernie, and maybe there's a different angle that we should be covering. Something that hasn't been discovered yet.
Maybe.
Well, listeners, why not log on to markandpete.com and let us know your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you. So a very, very controversial subject, I know, but thanks for joining today's debate, and join us next time for more colourful conversations with Clergyman Pete and Businessman Mark.